It's day 318. It's also March 19th, 2020. And we are in Newnan, Georgia. Oh, and yup, looks like we got ourselves a pandemic.
You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description.
A pandemic? Serious stuff. And yup, I was down the rabbit hole in no time. Everything from the definition of a pandemic? Has there actually been one in my lifetime? To exactly when and where did this thing start? And who knew about it? And when did they know? Why were over 1,000 people dead in China? Tens of thousands in quarantine? And essentially a lockdown underway in the country? I mean, we already know that multiple countries had begun closing their borders, not allowing travel from China. And all the while, our media and our president, they were barely starting to talk about it. And in very different ways. Lots of questions. And a lot's happening pretty quickly. And as each day passes, and I listen, I read, and I watch, it's becoming more obvious to me that now might not be the right time to be a half a country away or more from anyone I know. But there were still a couple of things I needed to take care of in St. Mary's before heading out. One big lesson learned in our first almost a year on the road is that my decision to buy a motorhome and tow a car, well, that's evolved. I decided to sell my little electric car. I'd realized that over the course of several months, I'd taken the car off the car dolly a total of 6 times. And loading it and unloading it, well, that was an ordeal I was not fond of. Being a front-wheel drive and very low-clearance vehicle meant tow options were limited, and tow dollies, at least in my experience, are not fun. But for many other reasons, like we love to boondock. And while I am surprised at how many spots we'd actually gotten into and then back out of, there could have been so many more had I not been dragging that extra 5,000 pounds along for the ride. I think our next purchase will be an electric bike. We'll give the motorhome and the electric bike combo a try for a while. And the calendar tells us that spring begins tomorrow. But I am reasonably certain that Southeast Georgia is operating on its own calendar. Temps have now been pretty consistently at or above 80, which I love, don't get me wrong. But this Pacific Northwest dude has not enjoyed some of the changes that come along with the higher temperatures this early in the year. The dang bugs. I've scratched my arms to the point of scabbing over since our Great No-See-'em event of 2020 and the lessons that came with that in last week's episode. And the lizards. What's up with the lizards around here? Those dang things pop up out of everywhere. And I did not know that a lizard can indeed whittle its way into your rooftop air conditioning unit. Which, by the way, can turn the simple task of cleaning filters into a brand new adventure. Next time we chat, ask me how I know this, and if I ever got the lizard stain out of the couch. But inevitably, it was time to leave. And I got a pretty good credit banked with Sharon, and she assures me that she's got a spot for us anytime here in St. Mary's. I actually procrastinated most of this morning. I just kept telling myself I really did need to head out. And it's funny how both Dougie and Billie know. They watch as the morning routine changes. And the awning goes up and the cat wheel comes in, and before the ignition key is even turned, Billie has placed himself snugly below the driver's seat, and Dougie steps up onto the doghouse to resume his role as the co-pilot. In weaving our way back out of St. Mary's, I stopped to top off Vasilando's tank. And I'm pretty sure I got some funny looks as I ran out to take a photo of the gas prices. $1.95 a gallon. Just one more thing I'm gonna miss about you, Georgia. We'd head north, up I-95 until, well, that congestion around Atlanta told us it was time to veer west on Georgia 16. And that's how we'd land in Newnan. After a bit of driving around, just looking, we started heading out of town on some random road when we came across another one of those for sale signs. This one, in front of what looked like some sort of automobile mechanic shop. Living quarters in the back. A big open space. We pulled around, parked. I thought about calling the number on the sign, but it was late. It's quiet out here. I think it's okay. We'll camp here tonight. Nothing else in sight. Just the Georgia woods. And a couple of houses up the road. It's a great spot for a couple walks, dinner, some reading, and some sleep. And it didn't take much reading and a couple of videos, and I'd already learned that Newnan, and this part of Georgia in general, was first inhabited by the Creek tribe, also known as the Muskogee, or, as they referred to themselves, Este Muskogee, which means people of the creek. They would inhabit a vast area for centuries of what would later become Georgia, Alabama, even regions within Mississippi and Tennessee. And discovery by European folk? Well, that is a very familiar pattern at this point. The Spanish arrived in the 1500s. They actually coined the phrase, the Creek people. France would pop in here and there for brief periods, but it would be the British that would begin settlement and colonization that would ultimately lead to the Americans finishing what the British had started. Here in Newnan, settlement would take place in the 1800s, when the city was established and named after General Daniel Newnan, a North Carolinian soldier and later a politician. The 19th century would bring the cotton industry to Newnan. It also brought the Civil War. But Newnan would escape, in large part, the destruction of the war, because it served as a hospital city. And this was the first time I'd read the term hospital city. Newnan operated 7 Confederate hospitals, and these hospitals, along with private homes in the area, would care for over 10,000 Confederate soldiers. And hundreds of Union soldiers would be treated as well. And it was pretty cool reading that even during the brutality, the savagery of war, when it came time to treat a wounded soldier in Newnan, even in the 1800s, it didn't matter what uniform they were wearing. And Newnan would continue its growth after the war. Railroads would be introduced, and electricity would begin to show up in the form of streetlights. And the industrial era would introduce an array of industries ranging from textile and manufacturing plants all the way up to the technological industries of today. The city's proximity to Atlanta makes it a popular spot for not only businesses, but commuters as well. But all through that growth, Newnan kinda sounds to me like might be a textbook example of the darkness that would follow the Civil War here in the South. I looked around as I walked with Dougie, trying to picture a time when it would have been slaves working in the fields, and then freed slaves, many of which still working under their former owners for nominal wages, and how some would have to leave, the only home they ever knew, to escape, truly escape, their horrible past, or to simply escape death at the hands of another, as the term lynching came into favor. Newnan would find itself smack dab in the middle of national attention in 1899, when a 24-year-old African-American laborer named Samuel Thomas Wilkes, going by the name Sam Hose, would be accused of murder and in turn brutally murdered by a white lynch mob right here in Newnan. It was a gruesome event, and worse yet, a public event. A large crowd would gather to watch Sam's murder. And even more sadly, that's all they did. The incident may have caused national outrage, but it never warranted anything more. No investigation, no trial, no justice for Sam. However, if there is anything positive to come out of Sam's murder, it would be that the deep determination within the growing civil rights movement would grow even deeper. And I'd also read of Wilson Turner, a sharecropper in 1948 Newnan, a series of events that would later be chronicled in the movie Murder in Coweta County. I watched the movie, released in 1983, starring Andy Griffith and Johnny Cash. It tells the tale of how Wilson Turner would essentially be set up and murdered by a man named John Wallace, who fully expected to easily get away with it. Now, thankfully, it didn't turn out that way for John Wallace, thanks to the efforts of Coweta County Sheriff Lamar Potts. Now, both Turner and Wallace were white men, but the events and the movie paint a vivid picture of what life was like in Georgia for everyone, what was accepted and tolerated, and where African Americans fit in American society in Newnan, Georgia in 1948. Almost 50 years after Sam was publicly murdered, not too very far from the courthouse in which Wallace would be tried, convicted, and put in the electric chair. Oh, but I did get a bit of a new favorite quote from the movie. It's $1 and a dime. $1 and a dime? What for? Well, it's $1 for me and a dime for my dogs. Dang, I wish I could do accents. Here, I'll let Johnny Cash show you himself.
I can't be too careful these days. There's just too much badness about. I've been robbed 22 times. Dogs, get! This is my sister, Sally Lancaster.
Miss May Haley, I understand John Wallace sometimes visits you.
He killed Wilson Turner.
Did he tell you that?
Well, he didn't have to. I am an oracle of the ages. So was I born, and so do I live.
Yes, ma'am. Well, we're looking for Wilson Turner's body. And if there's any information that you could give us...
Well, it's $1 and a dime.
$1 and a dime? What for?
Well, there's $1 for me, and then there's a dime for my dogs.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay? All right, over here.
And I'll put a link to the full movie in the show notes. It's hard to believe, sitting here in this quiet little spot, that there are actually over 40,000 people here, somewhere. I sure hadn't seen anything that would have led me to guess Newnan was this big. And even harder to believe that just 40 miles behind us, Atlanta, and the millions that live there. I rounded out the evening by trying to get an update on this COVID-19 thing. And across the networks, talk has definitely dialed up around this coronavirus, and I was already confused again. I find myself more and more going to global news agencies, the BBC and France 24. Here, I just wanted to know the name. Why have I heard so many different names? The Wuhan coronavirus, Wuhan pneumonia, 2019 novel coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS, the China flu, the China virus. When the reality is that globally, scientific and medical communities were aware of and communication around the virus back in November and December of last year. While Wuhan was locking down, and in spite of China's efforts to keep things quiet, the World Health Organization had named the virus 2019 novel coronavirus by January of this year. And on February 11th, the same day the BBC told me about the virus, the World Health Organization had shortened the name to COVID-19 and has referred to it by nothing else ever since. And knowing all this, I just kept thinking back over just the last few weeks to the beginning and middle of February. I was just a guy in South Georgia with a laptop and an internet connection who was told on February 11th that a virus born in Wuhan, China would threaten everything. So if I knew it, certainly the people responsible for running the country, ensuring the safety of Americans, well, they had to know, and a whole lot more than I did. And then I saw this on the news network France 24, published today.
Do you have a plan to contain the coronavirus in the U.S.?
We do have a plan, and we think it's going to be handled very well. We've already handled it very well. CDC has been terrific. Now, the virus that we're talking about having to do, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically, that will go away in April. We're in great shape, though. The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true. We have done an incredible job. We're going to continue. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
In the name of Jesus, we thank you, oh God, for this group holding up the arm.
Yes, Lord. Yes. Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. It's all turning. They lost. It's all turning. Think of it. And this is their new hoax. 35,000 people on average die each year from the flu. Did anyone know that? 35,000. That's a lot of people. And so far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States. Nobody. And it doesn't mean we won't, and we are totally prepared. It doesn't mean we won't. But think of it. You hear 35 and 40,000 people, and we've lost nobody, and you wonder, the press is in hysteria mode. At this moment, we have 22 patients in the United States currently that have coronavirus. Unfortunately, one person passed away overnight. Additional cases in the United States are likely
Is your message that to Americans that it's safe to fly, and can you convince the traveling
Yeah, I
public
think
about
where
it?
these people are flying, it's safe to fly, and large portions of the world are very safe to fly.
Are you concerned that the virus is getting close to the White House?
No, I'm not concerned at all. No, I'm not. No, we've done a great job. My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak that started in China and is now spreading throughout the world. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. Our overriding goal is to stop the spread of the virus and to help all Americans who have been impacted by this. And this will pass. This will pass through, and we're going to be even stronger for it. We've learned a lot. I also took the test last night. Yeah. And I decided I should, based on the press conference yesterday. People were asking, did I take the test? Well, if you don't have to travel, I wouldn't do it. If you don't have to travel, we want this thing to end. We don't want a lot of people getting infected. We want it to end and end as quickly as possible. We've made the decision to further toughen the guidelines and blunt the infection now. We'd much rather be ahead of the curve than behind it, and that's what we are. Therefore, my administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts. I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus. We'll be invoking the Defense Production Act just in case we need it. In other words, I think you all know what it is. It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate.
Ay. This guy. The leader of the free world. And he makes my head hurt. It was the perfect time to shut the laptop. One last walk with Dougie. We'll even get Billie out there with us. I gotta get some of this stuff out of my head and get some shut-eye. We're gonna do some more driving tomorrow. And all I can really think right now is west. And I wonder what we'll learn there.
Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.